Brian Recker. Welcome to the Let's Give a Damn podcast.
What's going on, Nick? Thanks for having me, bro.
Absolutely. This has been a long time coming. I feel like I'm saying that more often. There's just a lot, scheduling with guests, and there's just so many fucking things going on in the world. But this truly is like something we've been talking about for months. And then the book came out, and we tried to do it closer to the book launch, and life has been lifing. So here we are. This is the right time for it to happen.
It's supposed to be. It's meant to
be. Exactly. So glad you're here. And for those not watching this on YouTube, for those listening, you will not know that we are wearing the same exact hat, the Let's Give a Damn trucker hat. Every time I go out, and I wear this most days. I'm kind of like a walking billboard for Let's Give a Damn. But every time I go out, I mean, and I'm not exaggerating, no less than 5 to 10 people will call it out. It's ambiguous. People don't exactly know what I mean by Let's
what
Give a Damn.
What are we giving a damn about exactly?
No. And there's
where do I start?
Yeah, exactly. There's so many things. And there's probably a lot of people that I wouldn't agree with ideologically that also like the hat. But I like that it sort of evokes a response. And there's been plenty of times where I get to like sit and talk with someone for quite a while about it. So I love the hat. Thank you for indulging me and wearing it on this podcast.
I'm ready to give some damns.
I know you are, and you already do.
You know who doesn't give out damns is God.
That's right. That's right. He does not. And that's what we're going to talk about today. A different kind of damn that he does not give out. This is going to be, an interesting conversation because everyone knows that I'm a Christian on this show. I talk about it very often. I'm very open about my faith. Most of the listeners are not. They're not Christian. There are some in the mix, and there are many other faiths, and there are people with no sort of evident faith background. But I think this applies so much. One of the reasons I wanted to have you on was because for those of us living in what is traditionally called the West, hell, the existence of hell in our minds and the existence of hell in our belief system has caused so much of the shit that we're dealing with right now.
Totally.
I completely believe that. I believe that if we had not made hell, one of the main things that we kind of hold people captive with, they wouldn't go around being the assholes that they're being by reading the scriptures, reading the Bible literally, and then carrying that out in the world. And so that's why I think this applies so much to damn givers all over the place. So excited to get into it. But before we get too deep into your book and hell and all of that, I want to get to know you a little bit more. We know each other, but the folks don't know each other. And there's probably many things about your story that I don't know. So if you could just take a few minutes, Brian, enlighten us. Who are the people, places, and things that made you who you are today? How did we get here?
Yeah, man, a long and winding road. I'm a son of an independent fundamental Baptist pastor in New York City, actually. So my dad is still, he pastors a fundamentalist church in Manhattan. He's planted 3 fundamentalist churches in New York City, in Brooklyn, Queens, and Manhattan. And so I grew up fundamentalist. The world, I mean, there's different fundamentalist sort of spheres, and Bob Jones University was kind of the mothership hub shaping the ideology that I grew up with. So some of your listeners may be familiar with Bob Jones. They've made the news at several occasions over the last few decades because they have a history of racism. They were very slow to move on ending segregation within their school. They had an anti-interracial dating policy until the year 2000 was when they changed their anti-interracial dating policy, which is really insane when you say it out loud. But that was the world I grew up in. And I went to Bob Jones following my dad's footsteps. It's like where they wanted me to go. And I didn't really have a rebellion in high school. I kind of was homeschooled and just was going with the flow. And began, I think I like to say my first deconstruction happened at Bob Jones, where I deconstructed fundamentalism and found more mainstream evangelicalism. Bob Jones was a very unappealing place. It was a bad place. And even though that fundamentalist world was all I grew up with, confronted with it on a larger scale, seeing all those fundamentalists congregating in one location, it was just a bad vibe, man. And it really turned me off to the movement. And I latched onto several evangelical voices to my shame and embarrassment. People like Mark Driscoll, John Piper. These were voices that, around 2005, 2006, helped me see a pathway out of fundamentalism while still being able to hold on to a lot of the theology that shaped my identity, my worldview, and also would continue to allow me to experience belonging in the relational networks I was a part of, which were all connected to church and Christianity. And I reflect. You and I, we talk about Piper. I don't know if people in your listening to this would know who like Driscoll are. Do they know who that is? Like, would people listening to this know who that is?
They might. I'm sure some of them do. I mean, Driscoll himself has made the news. He's pretty widely known, even outside the circles, I think, as a pretty bad dude. So probably some.
As a fucking asshole.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's funny. In many ways, he carries a lot of the same fundamentalist DNA that I grew up with in the way that he holds beliefs rigidly with certainty, expresses them with black and white, exclusionary, even violent rhetoric. But he projects himself as just like a regular guy. And so fundamentalism, what I was in, we had to wear suits and ties. My dad preached only out of the King James Bible. Women didn't wear pants. They had to wear dresses. We didn't listen to any secular music, certainly didn't drink beer, teetotalers to the extreme, et cetera, et cetera. All these things that were like, fundamentalism is all about separatism. And so being exposed to somebody like Driscoll, who he was, he wore jeans and a t-shirt. He was a regular guy. He would say damn every once in a while, even from the pulpit. He talked about how he would drink beer. And so in many ways, it was like a more human approach to still being able to hold on to some of that theology that, again, shaped my worldview and identity from a very early age, while being able to experience a bit more humanity and not feel so separated from culture at large. So I dove into evangelicalism, and that felt really like a huge progressive leap for me, which
Sure.
is funny to, for some people when they hear that. But for me, it was a really expansive world compared to the fundamentalism I grew up in. And it took me a few years to recognize that, my evolution wasn't done yet. That was just the first deconstruction. And fast forwarding, I got really involved and became a pastor quite young within evangelicalism. Once I saw this vision for pastoring where you didn't have to be like a total weirdo, it was very attractive to me because I grew up as a pastor's kid. There was always that sense maybe I would do that, but I had to have a vision of it that felt more like me. And seeing that in evangelicalism, I got sucked into that. And it was really the 2015 elevation of Donald Trump to the front runner status in the Republican Party that was the first time that the rose-colored glasses started to shatter for me with
Yeah.
evangelicalism, when I started to realize that where I was at, just even morally, was on a really different page than this movement. And it was quite startling for me watching many of the leaders that I respected get behind Trump. My own parents, like my dad, who explained to me during the Lewinsky Clinton scandal how character matters in the office and all this stuff. That same person is now defending the Access Hollywood tapes as locker room talk. And I was just like, it felt very confusing to me. And I realized that there is a lot of cognitive dissonance in evangelicalism where, they're willing to trade out a lot of their moral positions for power. But I think for a while in 2015, certainly my sense was like righteous indignation that this is not who we are. You know what I'm saying? I was just like, this is not who we are. And really my journey from 2015 to 2020 was slowly coming to that realization that this is exactly who we are. And that's what it took for me to come to that place of actually resigning and stepping away from pastoring in 2020, recognizing like this movement is not something that I can change from the inside, and I shouldn't even be trying to, because it doesn't deserve my voice or my leadership. And out of integrity, I needed to remove myself from it completely. And once I was out from under that institutional pressure and that relational network where so much is expected of you in order to just belong And so much is lost when you do separate yourself from that, not just financially. You lose your salary and your ability to get another salary within that network, because that's where all your professional connections are, but also just relationships, that these people that I had done life with were going to look at me as this backslider, or a liberal compromiser and that sort of thing, which is a really hard pill to swallow. And I think, yeah, that's what I think is the hardest thing about deconstructing for a lot of people, is just recognizing that these people that you have been close to are going to think bad thoughts about you. And you kind of have to just eat that shit sandwich a little bit.
Yeah, I went through it. I know exactly what eating all those shit sandwiches tastes like. I still got the residue some days. Okay, so there's lots I want to jump into there. Let's back up to your dad is still a fundamentalist pastor. We call it church planting because you said he has 3 churches that he started,
Yeah.
which I always thought church planting was sort of a weird thing, but I was in that world as well. It was a weird phrase. Um, do you have a good relation? Do you have a relationship with him,
Yeah.
or what does that look like if he's still like super in it and you're super not? If he's stuck with it this long, he really fucking like believes it.
Well, yeah, he's built his entire legacy on it. At this point, he's in his mid 60s and is still pastoring. He'll probably, I keep wondering, like, was he ever going to retire, or is he going to literally like just drop dead in the pulpit one day when he's like 95, like just preach until the wheels come off, And yeah, they meet in a school. He still gets there early and sets up chairs every week. I mean, that's his whole life. That's his world. And it's really hard to question something that you're that deeply invested in. And
Yep.
I don't really have that expectation for him to do that. I don't argue with him. I don't challenge him on those things. I don't find that that's helpful. In general, I don't think people change their mind from being argued into a position, especially not from your
Sure.
kid. Like, no parent has ever changed their mind because their kid gave them a real good argument. Like, that's just
Yeah.
not how it works. We change because we want to change. And so until it stops working for him, until the system he's in stops working or making sense to him, he has to choose that for himself. So I don't try to change my parents. I relate to them as my parents. I've had to set boundaries at various points. When I stepped away and when they realized like my kids were not going to be being exposed to what they would call the gospel, which I don't consider the gospel. I don't think it's very good news to tell a kid that, by default, they're going to hell and something radical has to change for them and they have to believe what you believe or else they're going to suffer for eternity. I don't know. It just doesn't really seem like good news at all. But they feel sad that my kids aren't being exposed to that message. And so they have tried to, weave it in their
Yep.
grandparent time. And so I've had to set some boundaries around that. Like, hey, when you're around, I don't want it to feel like a missions trip and that sort of thing. And so our relationship is strained for sure. Like, he doesn't like that I do stuff like this. Even one time he said, he berated me that I was going on podcasts talking bad about Bob Jones. Like, he was
Yeah.
defensive of Bob Jones. He was like, the Bob Jones, which you owe so much to that. It's actually your very life, your origin began in Bob Jones. He was talking about the fact that he met my mom there.
Yep.
And I'm like, wait, so I can't critique it because my parents met there? Like, that is a really weird thing to say. And also, I didn't even know you cared that much about this institution, but he takes it all quite personally. And I try to remind him that none of this is personal, that I'm on my own journey, just like he's on his own journey. This isn't like a personal thing about him. This is about me being authentic to what I believe and what I think is right and what I think is causing harm that needs to be called out. And so I've got to be true to me, just like you got to be true to you. And, he's kind of received that, but it has led to, like I said, quite of a shallowness in our relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. That's tough. That's tough. And speaking of Bob Jones, for those listening that are hearing the words Bob Jones University for the first time, you think you know what we're talking about, and you don't fucking know. I'll tell you my little history with Bob Jones. And Bob Jones is a very conservative school, but there were schools that were even more conservative. I don't know if like Pensacola Christian College was ever part of, like, if you knew about, there were schools that even got more conservative than Bob Jones. But I almost went to Bob Jones back in 2008. I was offered a full ride. So I graduated high school 2002, but then took 5 years, traveled the world, worked everywhere. And then I was like, well, maybe I need to go to school now. And I got a full ride without even asking. They just like liked me and they were like, we'd love for you to come here. And I almost went just because I was like, at the time I was like, I was poor. I was, didn't really know what I was going to do next. And so I was like, yeah, maybe I'll go. And I went and visited. And I have lots of friends who went to Bob Jones. And again, y'all that are listening, you don't even know. I mean, like, you can't wear denim at certain times of the day. The girls can't wear pants.
They had to wear
Yeah,
pantyhose. Well, I think they've
yeah,
changed some of this actually. Their student body has really dwindled. But when I was there, the girls had to wear pantyhose every single day. I had to wear a tie every single day. Girls would get demerits, even if my ex wife, she got demerits all the time for skipping out on pantyhose because she would wear ankle length skirts or dresses to avoid having to wear pantyhose. But if they
and
noticed that your ankles
they
were
would still get it.
unhosed, they would still get you, bro.
And you mentioned like they did not start letting black students go to school there until the early 70s. So from 1929, I think was when they were founded, till the 70s, if you were not white, you couldn't go there. Or if you were black or brown, you could not go there. Then they started letting black and brown people attend the school, but it wasn't until, as you pointed out, 2000 that they allowed interracial dating. So for 30 years, if a black girl and a white dude wanted to date, they couldn't. It was not just like frowned upon, or it was forbidden.
Yeah.
I mean, this school,
They
it took them
reasoned this,
so.
how absurd and evil. They reasoned about this. They said it was to, because they had a responsibility to these parents who were sending their daughters there.
Yep.
So it was like a sense of protecting the white daughters, basically,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah,
they
because
had that
dangerous black men,
responsibility.
of course. Yeah, yeah. If you go Google Bob Jones University interracial dating, their statement. They have a statement from many years later. They talked about it. I think it was in 2008. They put out a statement. Probably other statements as well. It's just it's just so shitty. I typed it up again today, just thinking about Bob Jones in preparation for our call. But anyway, I did not go there. I almost did. I
Where'd
ended
you
up going
go?
to I ended up going to John Piper's school in Minneapolis
Okay.
instead, which was a different kind. I mean, it was a different flavor of bad. It just wasn't,
Not quite as
it wasn't.
strict, probably. I mean, we looked
No.
at like even Liberty University, who's, they're kind of seen as like even a bit of a fundamentalist, very strict evangelical school. We saw them as liberal compromisers. At Bob Jones,
Hmm.
they were like the loosey goosey ones for sure.
Well, yeah, because they had Christian rock concerts there.
Totally.
Sure, they were still conservative on this, that, and the other, but when it came to like music, and yeah, lots of other things, dating, all the stuff, they were super progressive. They were super liberal, even though Liberty University they're all Trump supporters, and they're very MAGA, up and down.
It's such a good example, though, of how, like, I mean, we all have a starting point, and
Yeah.
it's easy for us to like look back and be like, man, that is so insane. How could I even go? Like, sometimes I'm like, I can't believe I ever went there.
Oh yeah.
But that was the world I was raised in, and it wasn't abnormal to me. This was normal. That was normalized. All the rules that they had were like not that different than the kind of rules that I grew up with in the first place. So none of it felt incredibly foreign to me. It felt quite familiar. And now in retrospect, it's, it's quite ghastly, but,
Yeah.
I think it's good to have grace for our past selves. Like, you don't get to choose those initial ways that you're socialized, but as you grow up, you get to choose who you become, and you can reflect back on that, and you've got to evolve. So I can be a little embarrassed that it took me as long as it did, or that I went there ever in the first place. But ultimately, sometimes you just have to be confronted with certain things and be exposed to new ways of thinking and being, and then you have the opportunity to change.
What do you think? What do you think you have, and I have, and others have, that changed and progressed quite quickly when confronted with realities and truths? What did we have that others don't? Because it is kind of wild that it took me, like, I was in very homophobic, for example, if we just take homophobia, very homophobic circles for a long time. Now, I don't think I ever was. I was always uncomfortable with it. But I stayed there for years and years and years and years.
Yeah.
I worked with these homophobic pieces of shit, quote unquote leaders for so long, and I didn't leave. But at a certain point, I did. And again, now, like you said, I try to be kind to myself. I have just quite the past working for some of the largest evangelical leaders alive. I worked with, John Piper and Don Carson and Mark Driscoll, and all. I worked with so many of these leaders that have written so many harmful books and shared so much harmful theology. I worked close by them at different times, and so I try to be kind to myself. But back to my original question, like what do we have? Do you think that helped us? Like,
Yeah.
because I don't have any darlings. Like, I don't have any golden cat. Like, as soon as I'm faced with a truth, this is how I've always been. But as soon as like, as soon as it's there and it's like, oh my God, that's like, I don't care to say, yeah, I changed. I'm changing my mind. But other people, like maybe your dad,
Oh,
like
it's
you
hard
said,
to
his whole
change.
legacy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think human beings are just incredibly complex. So
Yeah.
there's all kinds of things happening. So I don't know that I could attribute it to any one thing. But so part of that is probably the way you're predisposed. Like you're the guy who gives a damn. Like you get hot about things and you care deeply about things. I do think, in general, like there's a lot of safeguards to keep you from being reflective about that stuff. Like, for instance, I also was uncomfortable with the way that the movement I was in viewed queer people. I, though, thought, hey, that's just the way it is. Like, that's what the Bible says. This is what God says. And even though I don't like it, that's a problem in me. So I had self-doubt. So
Yep.
what kept me in it for a long time was that the parts of me which were uncomfortable with what I was a part of, I didn't know how to listen to those or trust those parts of me. So I shut down even my own intuition, which said, like, yeah, my intuition says I don't like having to believe this about queer people, but I
Right.
have to, right? And so I didn't know how to sort out, hey, what if actually that part of me was right and these motherfuckers are wrong? I didn't know
Yep.
how to do that for a long time. And so that's a skill that is actually very intentionally shut down in these spaces because the system really depends on you suppressing those intuitive voices and listening to the authority figures who are tend to be patriarchal white men, right? Who are the authority figures who are shaping who you're allowed to even listen to. And so for
Yeah.
me, that growth happened when I learned that I was allowed to listen to more voices. First of all, my own, but beyond that, Black and brown voices, queer voices, immigrant voices, voices from the margins that have been critiquing these systems for a long time, which I didn't know I was allowed to listen to those. And so for me, it had to stop working. I only let myself listen to some of those voices when Trump was really the moment, because it was like, oh, these people who have been telling me gay people are
Yep.
bad, women can't lead. The Bible has no errors. And by the way, our interpretation of it is the only one that makes sense. The people who are saying those things also then said, hey, Trump will be a great president. And I might not have known everything about everything. And I was actually quite politically naive and disconnected, but I knew enough to know they were wrong about that.
Yeah.
And that gave me permission to ask, well, what else are they wrong about? And begin to listen to the voices that have been denied. So it's almost like the system had to stop working. It had to die at some level. And only then can you begin to challenge it. But that is different for everybody. Sometimes I think, like, if if you didn't see it in 2015 when the Access Hollywood tapes came out, then I'm like, you're never going to see it. But that's not true. Some people literally just yesterday or 2 days ago from his anti-Rob Reiner tweet, it broke for them, right? They
Yep.
had been Trump supporters, and then they saw Trump go on a deranged rant against a beloved filmmaker who was stabbed to death in his home with his wife, and Trump made that about himself. Like, how ghastly is that? And for some people, even though they've been tracking with him this whole way, overlooking, to me, it's like, what? I wasn't surprised by that at all. I'm like, of course he said that. That's exactly the kind of thing he'll say. But for some people, that was their moment. And
Yeah.
I can judge them and be like, why did it take so long for you? I saw this back in 2015. But for some people, they'd say, oh, no. Like, I saw it much before. I mean, look at George W. Bush. Was that any better? Like, I saw through that. Or, we all have our moments, and we can be judgmental about other people that don't catch up with us. But at some point, it has to break. It has to die, because it is a death. And nobody wants to die. So there's a lot keeping us from accepting that death.
Yep.
Because it's one thing to just say, oh, I think Trump is a bad guy now. If that's all it was, maybe that would be easier. But this goes deep. This is to say, oh, this whole system I was a part of is absolute bullshit. And they've been feeding me shit, and I've been swallowing it for years. That's a hard thing to own up to. So changing in public is incredibly vulnerable. It involves saying, I've been complicit in some things. And that is, that's hard. So yeah, I don't know that there's a magic formula for that.
Yeah. Oh, I think I think you're right. There is no magic formula. I didn't mean to, for anybody listening, I wasn't trying to get Brian to say, hey, Nick and Brian and all of us were more
I'm one of the
special
special
or
ones.
we're more like talented. That's not what it is. I think it is. I think for you, it was Trump. For me, it was, you know, a variety of other things. But at some point I had to, for the first time, really say out loud in front of people, in front of someone, in front of a community, say, I no longer, this is bullshit. I no longer believe this. And you don't have to either. And then when you try it out, it gets easier and easier and easier when you're faced with truths and realities to be like, oh yeah, that's bullshit, right? Because you're so right that those that have never been part of, and not even just Christian, those that have never been part of fundamentalist religious groups might not know how ingrained these things get into you. And as you pointed out, if you ever did doubt something, if you ever doubted like how we're treating queer people or how we're treating this group and that group, and oh, I want to accept them more. I want to bring them in, and then you're told, no. This is they take advantage of language from the Bible that talks about being persecuted for your faith. Well, of course, this is going to feel comfortable. Jesus wasn't comfortable when he was being
Right.
nailed to the cross. Of course, this is going to be bad. Don't be a doubting Thomas. Like, there's all these things that they throw at you that just reinforces it. And then you're like, oh, yeah, I do feel like I might be wrong here, but that's just the enemy. That's just the world trying
Yeah.
to get in there.
There's a lot of workarounds they have to tell you.
Yeah,
I will say this, another thought I just had, Nick, one benefit that I have, and maybe you have too, similarly. I think that growing up in fundamentalism actually gave me a leg up in some ways because people who grew up in cults or incredibly high control religion that is quite separate from society. In other words, it's like super weird. Like Bob Jones, it's fringe. I didn't grow up in mainstream Christianity. I grew up in a very tribal, niche of it. And as a result, I almost had no choice but to deconstruct that just to be
yeah,
even normal and enter kind of the more mainstream evangelicalism. But having done that and almost being forced to do that, because the other option is, keep wearing the suits and be an absolute fucking freak. And that was just never going to be me. That's not who I was. So I had to break out of that. But once you deconstruct one system, you kind of recognize that we're all socialized in these different ways. And it gives you, I think, the ability to recognize, okay, if I broke out of this one, why would I lock in to another one? Like I have the ability to
100%.
choose. I have the ability to use my moral discernment. Now, I didn't get there immediately, but I do think breaking from that first one gave me probably more strength to break from the second one than I think somebody who grew up in more mainstream evangelicalism, which was a bit more comfortable and maybe didn't have to do that initial break out of fundamentalism. Maybe it's like you don't have the muscle for that deconstruction. Because deconstruction is not just about changing a few theological beliefs like, oh, I had this punitive vision of God and now I believe in like a nicer God. It is uprooting identities, the
Yeah,
way that the systems you were born in socialized you, recognizing that these things are not just default the way the world is. It's not reality. The white male patriarchal world that I grew up in, it's not just reality. That was a system that was constructed. And when you, I think, get a muscle for that and you've exercised it, you get better at it.
yeah, yeah. Couldn't agree more. And a great reminder that you shared a few minutes ago for all of us. For me, it's reminding me today that no one, maybe there are exceptions, but I'm gonna, for the sake of being in the spirit of this conversation today, no one is beyond change. Like we have to have grace for ourselves and for others as we all figure. I mean, this is so hard. Life is so hard, and we do have so like capitalism and these systems have caused us to believe so many harmful things. And even in Christianity, even for those that aren't Christian, if you live somewhere in the so-called West, you have been affected by Christianity. It's all around you. And so, my friend Katie Bogan, who's been on the podcast as well, great human, Jewish woman.
Hot chef,
Yes, the hot
right?
chef storyline. Yes.
I'm
Um,
following. I'm tracking.
She and I text all the time about it. It's so funny. But Katie the other day posted on Threads that after 11 years of talking with her father, who is Jewish, about the occupation and about apartheid and about the last couple years, the genocide. Um, After 11 years of having intentional conversations about this, all on his own at like a dinner the other night with her present, he looked at their friends in front of her and said, Katie has been so patient with me, and I'm now willing to call this what it is. It is a genocide. This is
Wow.
like a horrible empire, the state of Israel. And after 11 years of work, now my natural inclination when I see something horrible that I got quicker, that I understood quicker,
Mm.
is to be like, dude, fuck you. 11 years, 11 years, 11 years it took you to realize that what's happening is just a horrific occupation, and this was stolen from the Palestinians over and over again over the past 76 years, and before that with the British under the Balfour Declaration. Like, this is such a 11 years it took. And then there's a voice inside of me, and this conversation is reminded to be like, dude, slow your roll, man. Like, it takes people time. And I can be angry all the time. I can be angry all the time that people aren't changing quickly enough, whether it's about God and religion, or about Israel, or about ICE, or about Trump, or about whatever the thing is. I can be so angry that, like, how do you not fucking get this? Like, it's so obvious. Just look at it. And then you see, like you said, there were some people that 10 years into Trump's horrible, whatever the fuck he's doing here, since he came down that golden escalator 10 years ago, 2 days ago, when he badmouthed Rob Reiner, may he rest in peace, that's when they got it. And I want to be like, are you kidding me? But it's okay that they got it then, and now they're going to change, and hopefully they'll
Yeah.
continue changing.
Because, dude, I mean, when you think about it, like there's things right now that we're stuck in and we're probably ignorant of and
Of
complicit. I mean, I
course.
know I'm complicit in all kinds of things, like, and I still am. And I'll probably in 10 years look back on even the way I'm living right now and be a little embarrassed about aspects of it. I mean, that's just, we're on a journey, and that's not to just let ourselves off the hook. But I think, especially in terms of how we view others and how we give grace to others, I was reflecting on this because I try to have a gentleness, not only to my past self, but also to evangelicals and where they're at now. But I can be snarky and cheeky and a bit of a jackass too. Like, I have that in me, and I'm only human. But I had just actually posted something where I kind of referred to, like, an evangelical leader as a piece of shit, and I ended up deleting it, because I don't think it's bad to say that. I think that that's kind of, I don't mean it in any kind of literal way, but as a dehumanizing phrase, and
Sure.
ultimately I'm wanting to, like, extend grace to people. And I was reminded I was reminded of this, like, worship song I used to sing, like a Hillsong song. You know the one, I'm sure, where in the bridge it's like, break my heart for what breaks yours, you
Oh,
know
yeah.
you know the one.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, for some reason that came into my mind, and it made me feel, in that moment I was just overwhelmed with the sense that, like, what's happening in the evangelical movement breaks God's heart. That the God, as I believe in God, a God of love, a God who desires liberation for all, God's heart is broken by a movement that would hijack the very concept of the divine to baptize bigotry and to fuel white racial resentment against people. And ultimately, in the name of Jesus, rather than care for the very people that Jesus said would be stamped by the divine image and we would see Christ in them, the least of these, the hungry, the stranger, the imprisoned, all those same groups that Jesus said, this is where I am most present in the world, in these vulnerable people, and where you meet God is in the face of the last lost, left behind. Those exact people are the ones that are being scapegoated, vilified, demonized, imprisoned, and that's happening in the name of God. And in that moment, I was not just filled with anger at the evangelical movement. I actually felt a lot of sorrow. And I felt that God is sad about this, and I want to be sad about it. And so these are people that need to have their eyes open. You use spiritual language, like there is a spiritual blindness, and I want to see scales falling off of eyes.
Yeah.
And the reality is, nobody has ever been shamed into change. Now, that's not to, I'm not like shitting on you. I often can use shaming language. I just know that the way that I changed is ultimately through love. And that's how, I mean, when I try to parent my kids, in like when they're having a meltdown, they're acting inappropriately, or they're, one of my kids is like hitting their brother or something. I can't just say like, what's wrong with you? Like, who
Yeah.
does that? Like, what's like, why are you so violent? Why, that's all shaming language. That does not make them better people. That often causes them to freeze, to buckle down in the behavior that they're doing. And maybe shame could get some level of like behavioral change on the surface, but it doesn't actually change the heart. And so I don't know. I was just reminded of that sorrow in the heart of God. And I want more of that in myself. I want that compassion to come out in my life. I think if we're going to have a way forward for people, but it's hard.
Yeah, it's so hard. It's so hard. So you left. So kind of Trump woke you up in a lot of ways to all the shit that was going on, and then in 2020 you said you stopped. You stopped being a full-time evangelical pastor, and now if people go find you, which I hope they do, you're for lack of a better term, an influencer, a content creator. You have a lot of these important conversations. You have hundreds of thousands of followers on social media. One thing I've loved is watching your, even before I knew you from afar, and now that we're friends, like watching your platform grow and how it resonates with people. So like we're going to get to your book. We're going to spend the rest of the conversation on the book, which I think is just so important. And I'm so excited for people to buy it and read it and devour it. But what was the journey like from like, okay, I'm not going to be this like full-time pastor anymore, but you still stayed in, you didn't go, which would have been totally fine. You didn't go get a job in finance. You didn't
Well,
go
I
like
did. I
back to,
did disappear for a
okay.
minute.
Okay.
So when I dropped out, I went back to seminary to finish my MDiv, and I thought I was going to reapproach ministry from a more progressive angle. But in the course of deconstruction, I mean, when you start deconstructing, you really just you experience a series of losses, and you don't know where that's going to end. It is a real slippery slope, and that's why it's scary. Whenever you break from a system, so much of who you are is integrated in that system. And one of the things that was developed and that grew from within that system was my marriage, and I ended up losing my marriage over the course of the year following leaving ministry and deconstructing. And when my wife and I separated, I dropped out of seminary, and I was thinking in a very like kind of a dark, discouraged place that there wouldn't be a future of ministry for me. So I got a job first as a recruiter. I got a bartending job, I got a recruiting job, and then I got a project management job. I was just trying to get something that could make sense so I could be a single dad and take care of my kids. And I didn't think ministry would be an option. And really, it wasn't until probably about 2 years or so after I stepped away that I started posting. And a lot of that just had to do with the fact that having lost my community, I didn't have a lot of people to process this stuff with. And so I was literally just externally processing my deconstruction, my thoughts on evangelicalism, and I was just doing it online. I don't know. I think I had already I'd already kind of broken with those relationships. I think there's a lot of pastors that do make these breaks, but they're not confident to speak out these things because they are still quite connected to the people in those systems and they don't want to offend them. Because when you talk about, it's crazy how like my old evangelical friends are like personally offended when I speak up for queer people, as if that's about them. It's not about them. It's about my journey. It's about the queer people that are marginalized in our society. But I think that, people know that like, those relationships will be offended. And so I think some people don't speak out for that reason, but they had already kind of distanced themselves from me. I mean, I went through my divorce and I was kind of blacklisted. And so I just felt a freedom to be honest and vulnerable. I had already kind of hit rock bottom in some ways. And so I was just very open. And I think that's what connected with people was, oh, here's somebody who was like deep in the system, a pastor, a white, straight, evangelical pastor who the thing stopped working and now he's talking about the harm of that system. And I guess that was interesting to people. So in the course of that, I had a lot of thoughts in me about evangelicalism, but hell has always been one of the big ones for me because I consider myself still a Christian. I did consider for a moment whether that label still applied to me, but I've decided to stubbornly hold on to it. But I've never really have doubted my belief in God, but who God was had to change because the God that I believed in didn't work for me anymore. And I realized as I struggled with like just the problems with the spirituality that I grew up in, that I inherited, that I even preached, and that wasn't working for me anymore. So many of the problems in my own spirituality went back to hell, to the punishing God that I believed in, to the exclusionary system that I was handed, where you were either in or you were out. So many of the problems went back to that. And I realized in all the conversations I was having with people, and I was having countless conversations with other Christians and deconstructing Christians, or people who used to be Christians who are still struggling with what could this all have meant. And in those conversations, I would just hear it come up a lot. And when I would talk about the fact that I didn't believe in hell, one of the most frequent questions I would get, people were confused. They were like, if you don't believe in hell, then what's even the point of being a Christian? Like, how does this even work? Because it was so central, so fundamental to the Christian story, that idea of exclusion and punishment. And so that really got my wheels turning. And I recognized that if I was going to say one thing, and if I had a book in me, it really was about the way that hell isn't just a belief that we should break up with. It's not just something we should change our minds about. It's not just a few Bible verses that we should reinterpret. It fundamentally robbed us of a healthy spirituality, and it twisted and corrupted our spirituality, sowing disconnection, alienation, and punishment instead of connection and flourishing at the foundation of our spirituality.
Yeah. Let's jump right in then. But let's define a few terms. Again, for those that maybe aren't in this world, as we begin this conversation about, or, keep continuing this conversation about your book, but specifically about your book right now, I'm going to ask you to define a few terms just so people know at least where you're at, right? Because these terms don't mean the same thing for all people. I guess the first one is this hell that you're trying to get people to not believe in. When you say hell, what do you mean?
Yeah. So different denominations have different approaches to hell. For me, I tried to take a very broad approach. The traditional Christian belief is eternal conscious torment. And it's the idea that everyone who's not a real Christian, however you want to define that, in the evangelicalism and fundamentalism I grew up in, pretty similarly, they viewed it as anyone who was not born again, which meant that they didn't put their faith in Jesus as the exclusive way to heaven. And so in other words, you had to really believe that Jesus was God, that he died on the cross for your sins. And typically there was also this atonement belief that you had to believe that Jesus died on the cross and took your punishment. And so at the core of really what I'm trying to deconstruct, and there are maybe some people didn't get this exact story, but for the most part, the story of Christianity that most of us inherited was a story of punishment. So in other words, God had to punish you. You were born worthy of punishment, but Jesus took your punishment. And if you believe in that, then Jesus can be punished instead of you. But at the end of the day, somebody's got to be fucking punished. That was the paradigm, that God's hands were tied and punishment had to be bestowed on someone. So either you're going to go to hell or Jesus experiences your hell for you on the cross. That was kind of the paradigm. And so that's one of the main things I'm poking a hole in, is this idea of hell being rooted in the character of a punitive God, really, a God who has to punish you. And that also there's this exclusionary binary idea that there are, in order to be saved, there have to be people who are damned. And so there's going to be insiders and outsiders. So that's part of the hell paradigm. And so really, however different people approach hell, there are people who are outside who did not believe the right thing or receive, the sacraments in the right way, or whatever the case, that caused them to be in a different category spiritually. And so it becomes less about, spirituality becomes less about a positive growth in love, like a life transforming in love, which I think spirituality is ultimately about this life and who we're becoming. But if hell is looming in the afterlife, then that really does overwhelm any this worldly story. And you'll see this, it creeps into their spirituality and their priorities, because you might even say, Christians will say, well, of course this life matters, love matters, loving people here matters, growing in the fruits of the Spirit, that matters. But at the end of the day, if you don't believe the right thing and you're going to go to hell, it doesn't really matter how loving you become, how many good deeds you do, how much social justice you do. Even if you put an end to the genocide or have all the, you could stop a genocide, and all those kids who don't die because of your acts of justice, if they don't believe the right things about God, they're still going to go to hell. So at the end of the day, believing the right things matters more than even genocide, like any of it. And so it becomes just very toxic belief. It's like a black hole that sucks in all the other spiritual priorities and crushes them under its weight.
And there's such a supremacist side to all of this, right? That Christians we're the best, not just the best, but we are the way. For some reason, this God that we had, this very punitive, angry asshole God, is a Christian. And if you belong to any other faith background. They're wrong. You're right. And so when you were just saying that just now, I had flashbacks to, working for John Piper. And one of the big things that the John Piper world created was this idea that we have to tell. There's a verse in, now I'm blanking on where it is, in the book of Mark about basically the Son of Man will come back when everybody on earth hears the gospel. So their big thing was we have to tell everybody, which doesn't make any sense because at any given time, no matter where you are, I mean, right now, hundreds, thousands of people are dying right now, and hundreds and thousands more are being born. So like the idea of telling everybody on earth is just an insane idea. But that was their whole shtick, was like, we've got to get missionaries, AKA colonizers, to go to all these far-reaching places around the world to tell them about the gospel. Because if they don't hear it and they don't accept it, it's our responsibility to tell them. And then it's their responsibility to listen to some random white guy that pops into their culture that says, hey, you've got to follow my white God and sing our white hymns and go to our white church. And that's how you actually stay out of this eternal conscious torment that we're talking about. So there is such like a supremacist. That was one of the first things that like popped out to me when I started waking up, was like, oh my God, you think you're the best of the best of the best, even though your people, the Christians, have been murdering and slaughtering and raping and pillaging since the beginning of our existence. Yeah. We've caused so many horrific things to happen, but forget all that. If you don't do it our way, eternal conscious torment for you. That supremacist view is just so fucked up to me.
Yeah, Christian supremacy is very much tied to white supremacy. In fact, Christian supremacy baptizes white supremacy as holy. Yep. And it's even, within the world, the gospel-centered sort of reformed world, John Piper world, and, Tim Keller, those guys, there's a lot of people who would say that they were anti-racist and that they hate white supremacy and that white supremacy is a sin. And they would even, when I was a pastor, I was involved in some of the Black Lives Matter marches. And so I was finding Christians that were anti-racist. But what you wouldn't see is them to disavow Christian supremacy. And so they might say that white supremacy is a sin, but they still believe, like you said, that everybody needs to hear their version of the gospel, that they are the ones who hold the keys, really, the answers about who goes to heaven and who goes to hell. And the problem is when you believe that, and ultimately the gospel that they're saying was a European, Western, white version of the gospel. And so you might think that you're against white supremacy, but you are actually fueling it, and you are giving it not only like ideological and spiritual justification. It was, in fact, this hell doctrine that fueled colonialism. I mean, the doctrine of discovery was the Catholic papal doctrine that basically said colonialism is justified biblically because those cultures are pagan. Those people are dying and going to hell. And so us colonizing them is bringing them civilization. It's bringing them the gospel. And so, yes, over the course of this conquest, are people going to die? Sure. Are civilizations going to be destroyed? Sure. There's going to be some collateral damage. But right now, they're going to die and go to hell. At least when we colonize them, they'll have the opportunity to hear the gospel, and then they can die and go to heaven. And so they justified the colonial project with, when you hold the keys to heaven and hell, you can justify anything, to include the slave trade. The slaveholders justified the exact same thing, that yes, kidnapping these, people from Africa and dragging them across the Middle Passage where millions are going to die en route. This seems horrible, but right now they're all going to die in Africa and go to hell. At least if we take them, we can give them the gospel. So they told themselves that they were doing a good thing.
Yep. Yeah. They went as far as converting all of these slaves, right? And then counting them as like, look at all these converts that we have, when it's like half or more of them, they were Muslim, and they grew up in Muslim households and in the Muslim faith until you kidnapped them and brought them over. And they were enslaved. They're going to do whatever the fuck you tell them to do. So you didn't convert anybody. And they would just add, they would use that as proof that we're doing a good thing. Look at how many of them now attend the little churches that we built for them, even though it was just for slaves. It was just for enslaved people. But like they would count that as to their numbers, and they would use it to prove their point that look at if we left them over there, they would be these like savage Muslim, Africans, and we brought them over here, and now they have jobs and they have food and they have security, and we built them churches and they're Christian. And so look at the good that we did. Yeah, it's horrific when you look back on the horrific things that we have done not just in the name of Christianity, but for the sake of the conversation today and us both still identifying as Christian, the things that Christians have done. How did you have something to I don't want to cut you off,
Well,
but
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
well, I was going to say, so I asked you to define hell. You did. Now, what about God? Because God, that's a huge one. I still, 10 years, 11 years into this, leaving my past life behind, and on a very regular basis, trying to figure out, like, I'm so attracted to God. Like, I love God. I can say that, like, now, again, my God is not a Christian God. It's a universal God. I don't believe it's a person. I don't believe it's so much bigger than anything we've ever tried to force feed people inside of the four walls of a church. But I still have no clue. Like, when people say, okay, who is God for you? What is God for you? I still have a hard time. I call God, universal love, and I
Yeah.
call God a variety of things. And I'm very, like, attracted to following God, because I have felt, I mean, it is, God has helped me, still helps me so often in life. And so anyway, God, what is, how do you define
A
God?
loaded question.
Such a
No, it's
small
true. My old
question.
God had to die. The God I
Yeah.
grew up in, you can Google this at home, but my first mental model for God was formed by Chick Tracts, which is a gospel track with it's an illustrated gospel track, and at the end of these gospel tracks, usually some poor, dirty, rotten sinner would die over the course of the comic book and find himself standing before God, who is this 1,000-foot tall, glowing white man in a throne with like a face. He had no face, like this faceless, glowing white person. And he would typically point away from him and say, "Depart from me. I never knew you," and send that poor son of a bitch to hell. And that big punishing authoritarian was God. This is somebody who you didn't want to be on his wrong side. He'll send you to hell. And so, although that was a childish image, and I grew away from that image to more loving images of God. But that still, I mean, at the end of the day, if hell is a part of your paradigm, that punitiveness, you might say, well, that's a metaphor. It's not really a big guy in a chair, but like, you still kind of feel like there is, and
Yep.
it's hard to uproot that completely. And for me, early in my deconstruction, especially getting rid of hell, I was attracted to less relational, sort of more I guess views of God that were more spiritual. So the idea of connection itself, of reality itself, a universal spirit of love, not so much a guy. However, though, lately I think, having given it some time to heal from some of the wounds of like a patriarchal sky daddy God, I am able to step back into some of those more personal metaphors. I mean, Jesus's favorite metaphor for God was Father, but it's important to know that that is just a metaphor. God is
Yep.
not an actual father. The idea of source, and there is a sense in which there is an authority to who God is, but not because of a patriarchal dominance, but because when you go against the way of love in the universe, we are made for love and connection. And when you step out of that, I think there are natural consequences. So I don't think God is a punisher. I do think that reality itself shows us what we're made for. And that when we build societies that don't value the image of God in one another, and instead we build hierarchical systems of domination, that when we do that, bad things happen actually as a result of our actions. And we could attribute that to God and see God at Father almost, and even use punitive, maybe even metaphors to describe what's happening. But I don't think that God is a punisher. I think I want to say it's like I got this from like Pete Holmes. You probably have heard that he like
Yes.
quoted the manager for AC/DC or something, and it's like I forget the guy's name, Barry something. He said God is the name of the blanket that we throw over the invisible mystery or something like that to give it a shape. Because there's something ineffable about God, a universal spirit of love. Rohr says God is reality with a personality, and I like that quite a bit. But for me, the nature of reality is love. And so it is the loving nature of reality. God is the loving nature of reality is maybe one definition that's helpful. I also, I think that we're all connected. I think that whether you know it or not, or are aware of it or not, we are all deeply interrelated, interconnected, interdependent. And I think that connection itself, that is God. It's almost as if like we are all in this big dance, this interdependent dance, and God is the name of that big connected thing that we're all a part of. And because it is all relational, that thing is less a thing and more of a who. So that's why we relate to God relationally, even though it's not a big guy. There is an itness, I think, to God rather than a pure who-ness. But because love is experienced through relationship, I think that if God is love, then we experience God as a who. We experience love through relationship. And so I think that's where that personal language can come back in. So I don't know. I
One
just
of
said a lot of words. Those are just ways that I think about it.
No, but that's good, and that's exactly where I'm at, where I'm open to viewing it in all kinds of ways. And I love that quote that, yes, I first heard it from Pete Holmes: God is the name of the blanket we put over mystery to give it a shape.
You
I
heard it?
love
Yeah, it's
that.
like he had a viral clip or something. And I was like, oh, that's
Yeah.
good. I'm writing that down. It's just stayed in
Oh,
my brain forever, ever since I heard him say that.
100%. And I love that imagery. And for me, you just put a name, you just named what one of my favorite things about believing in God is: if I believe in a universal God that is connecting all of us, I think that's going to change the way that we live, change the how inclusive we try to be, how much community we try to build. Because if I truly see you and uh, all kinds of people in all kinds of different groups, even the people that I loathe and hate, or think that I loathe and hate, definitely loathe. I hate. I struggle with that word. But the point is, like, if I start seeing everybody as part of my family, we're part of this human family, and there is this love, this mystery that we call God so that we can give the mystery shape, that's going to change how I approach every day with my family, with my work, with my neighbors, in the place that I live, the places I don't live. Why should I care about the genocide in Gaza? I'm way over here. Like, why should I care
Mm,
about what's happening, who ICE is kidnapping across? Like, I'm here, I've got my little thing here. And because there's nothing connecting us, who gives a fuck? Like, but it changes when you start seeing God, a loving God, not a punitive God, not a punishing God. When you start seeing God as something / someone that is working to unite us all, that to me, I'm not saying you can't be hopeful or positive if you don't have any view of God, if you're an atheist or if you're agnostic seeker, or if you're part of another faith. But like, for me, that really,
yeah.
as someone who runs an organization called Let's Give a Damn, and am trying to figure out ways of giving a damn more and more and more and more, one of the only things that keeps me sane is me being able to believe in a God that is for the people, places, and things that I'm giving a damn about, versus
Yeah.
it just having no meaning at all.
Yeah. I mean, God is a metaphor. God is a story. Um, and it matters how you use that story and what story you're telling with God. I mean, unfortunately, God is used the concept of God is used to do the exact opposite of what you're saying very frequently, because God is a very effective tool to also baptize the hierarchies and power structures that divide us and that say that some people are closer to God than other people and are therefore more worthy of ruling and having and hoarding than other people. And this is where power goes, because this is what God is like. We're the ones who get to speak for God. And so I always, there's different kinds of gods that they say a lot more about us than about God. Often the way that we use God. So when somebody's talking about God, I always am just asking, well, what are they using God for? Who's benefiting from this use
Yep.
of God? Is it benefiting everybody? Are we seeing God in everybody? If not, it's a really small God.
Let's define one last thing. And my thought at the beginning of asking that was there'd be like, which is stupid because you can't really define these things tightly, but it was like, let's define these three things pretty quickly and then we'll go into the
Oh
book.
yeah, I don't
But
have. I guess
no.
you should have told me in advance. I would have written little simple things, but I don't
Little
have
simple things. No, but
none of these things.
I like how it's happened because it has brought us into, the book. The last thing I want us to define though, it's come up a few times, which is, you're a Christian. but you're a universalist Christian. And so this is something, and so am I. The best thing that ever happened to me, like literally one of the best things that's ever happened to me is to, well, honestly, the one main thing that's keeping me in Christianity, the fucked up, thing that is Christianity, is the fact that I tack on universalist Christian before it. And then when people ask, I can define like, hey, I feel comfortable and I feel good. I feel like this is my community in Christianity. Again, as fucked up as it is, but I don't believe what we're doing, what we're saying, the way that we're doing is the only way. I don't believe that. And that's one of the only reasons I can still like go to mass and I can still partake in these things, is because universalism became, and you mentioned Rohr already. There's others that have really helped me become that person, because I would not, if I didn't encounter universalism in a real way, something that I wanted to really grasp onto, I don't think I'd be a Christian, because it'd be really hard seeing what's going on and then still being like, you know what, I still show up every day to Ex Episcopalian church and we're the only way. Like that would be pretty fucked up to me. So universalism, what does it mean to you, and how does it affect this idea of trying to steer people away from believing in eternal conscious torment, and how liberating that is?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Jesus had universalism in his spirituality, certainly.
Absolutely.
And I think for a lot of universalists, it is the idea that all people will be saved in some sense. In other words, not go to hell and go to heaven. So even the very word universalism, I often don't use it. I mean, I do use it in my book because it's helpful in this conversation. But for me, it's not even about the afterlife. I think that making
Nope.
spirituality about the afterlife is a big mistake. The idea that oh, everybody is going to go to heaven. I don't think that's what it's about. I'm agnostic as to what that even looks like in the afterlife. I don't believe in a punishing afterlife for people who believe the wrong religion, certainly. But I don't know that there's like literal streets of gold either. I do believe that we all came from love and that we will return to love. But for me, universalism is about the fact that God is not far from any one of us. I don't think that you have to be a Christian to know God. I think that we all are connected to God, whether we are aware of it or not, that God is in you and God is with you. God has always been with you. Salvation for me is a metaphor, which really is to describe that experience of awareness of the love of God that has never left you and couldn't leave you even if you wanted it to.
Yes.
That is what that means. And so for me, universalism is this sense that you can't gatekeep God. Evangelicals do not have a monopoly on God. Christians do not have a monopoly on God. There's no guy that can say, I can show you the way to God. There is no way to God. God is with you already. And when somebody's talking about they alone have the way to God, they are actually taking you further away from God in some ways. They're trying to draw you into their scheme, their hierarchy, that God is with you. And so I think becoming aware of the love and the presence of God is a part of what spirituality is all about. And unfortunately, hell-based exclusionary spirituality often leads us away from that presence and leads us into rules and legalism and really a sense of superiority. I think the more that we are feeling like we've got the way, we're the superior ones, the more we're doing that, the further we are from the heart of God, which is for all people. So yeah, hold on. I'm going to throw in a couple more terms really quick that I can define really quickly. So
Yeah.
I talk about spirituality a lot. And the way that I define spirituality is how we relate to ourselves, God, and other people. It's about
Yes.
relationships. And so the reason that I still call myself a Christian, I'll often say, is that although a lot of the Christian theology I'm quite either agnostic on or potentially a heretic on, I still call myself a Christian because I still follow the spirituality of Jesus. In other words, when I see the way Jesus relates to himself, God, and other people, I want to relate to God, myself, and other people the way that Jesus does.
I love that. And I share that definition of spirituality. The very first quote you have in the book, before even the table of contents, is from one of my favorite humans. I assume our favorite humans, James Baldwin. This quote: "Salvation is not precipitated by the terror of being consumed in hell. This terror itself places one in hell. Salvation is not flight from the wrath of God. It is accepting and reciprocating the love of God. Salvation is not separation. It is the beginning of union with all that is or has been or will ever be." That's so fucking
Isn't that
good.
great?
It's so great. It's exactly what you've been sharing. And I want this so badly. What I'd love for you to, we've got a few minutes left here. I, what I would love for you to do is, I've interviewed, I've done 290 of these episodes. And I, probably for some reason along the way, people with books started coming my way more. Uh, you know,
Well, we all want to sell our books, Nick. What can I
yeah,
say?
no, totally. But I and I love books. We're a family of readers. We have so many hundreds and thousands of books in our little New York City apartment. They're everywhere in our apartment. So I love books. But um, one of the things I would love for you to do. Oh, what I was saying is, I didn't want to go through the book. It's
Totally.
fantastic. Um, but what I would love for you to do is, the book Hellbent: How the Fear of Hell Holds Christians Back from a Spirituality of Love. And I don't know if it's your intention or if this would also be your intention, but let me add to the subtitle, which is like not just the fear of hell holds Christians back, but I think it's holding society back because
Mm,
Christians dominate so much. I mean,
yeah.
look at our I mean, in society, yes, we have these huge mega churches all over the place, just soaking up resources for their massive staffs and their massive budgets. And then there's homeless people everywhere. Then that's just like on a neighborhood, like city level.
Oh,
And then
yeah.
you have all these politicians, so many of them, so many of them. Go look at the last bills that have been introduced in Congress and in the Senate, and then up to the like. Go look at these bills, and if you go look back at what faith these politicians have that are proposing some of the most horrific bills. Um, Marjorie Taylor Greene with one of the more recent ones, just continuing to go after trans kids. Like, if you look at it's Christianity behind it. So
Totally.
I think this book is so important. I want everyone to read it because I think that whether you're a Christian or not, or whether you have any faith background or not, Christianity is everywhere you look if you live anywhere in the so-called West. So if people really get this, if people
Yeah.
read your book, really get it, start to embody this James Baldwin quote, what real
Yeah.
salvation looks like, what real God looks like, and with kind of shedding our beliefs in punitive God, punishing God, hell God, what's the vision here? What could
Uh-huh.
society look like?
Yeah. So I was raised being told that I deserved hell by default. In other words, I was born worthy of damnation, suffering, torture, really, because of my sin. And not just me, but everyone. I was told that's what people deserved.
Yep.
People are sinners. People deserve to be punished by default. Something has to change in them. God is going to punish people. That's what people deserve. We are worthy of that, worthy of punishment. Now I believe that I'm worthy of love. I believe that I am fundamentally, I didn't have to do anything to earn this. I was born, I am fundamentally worthy, deserving of care, compassion, my basic human needs met, and not just me, but everyone. I believe that people are fundamentally worthy of love. And I do believe, and studies have proven this, whether you believe people to be fundamentally worthy of punishment or fundamentally worthy of love does in fact change the way you treat them, change the kind of society that we want to build. It is no surprise to me that a bunch of people who believe that people are fundamentally worthy of punishment have built a very punitive society. A society where we would rather criminalize and jail homeless people, even if that costs more money than housing them. We do not even have a criminal justice system. We have a criminal punishment system. We are an incredibly punitive society. We don't want to see people rehabilitated. We don't want to see people restored. We want to see people punished. In many ways, I still do believe it matters what you believe about God. Not because you have to believe the right things about God or you're going to go to hell. God's going to punish you if you're wrong about God. If you get the answers on the God test wrong, you're fucked. No, no, no. It matters what you believe about God because what you believe God is like shapes what you're going to be like and shapes what you think the world should be like. And I believe God wants the flourishing of everybody, of the common good, of humanity, and to include non-human creatures. God's desire is not for a gated kingdom of the saved with the damned outside of that. God's desire is for shalom, the flourishing of the whole big connected thing. And unfortunately, Christians are not longing for that. They are not, because they don't have a God that believes that. They have a punitive God. And so it's no surprise to me that if they have a God whose future is a minority in a gated community with the vast majority of humans who have ever lived suffering for eternity, it's a pretty short leap from there to alligator Alcatraz. And I have had people, when I've talked about universalism, say, even bring up illegal immigrants and say in heaven, there's going to be no illegal immigration. They're not climbing that wall into the pearly gates. They're cast out into hell. They see these lines so clearly and so strictly drawn. And this is so devastating to our relationships at every level. On a very personal level, it sows alienation into the way that we view people, to include our own children. If we believe them worthy of punishment, we're not going to connect with them in the appropriate ways. In our neighborhoods and communities, when we see people struggling, we will assume the worst about them rather than assume that people actually studies show that when people have their basic needs met, like that bottom level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food, shelter, warmth, when people are taken care of on that level, they do better as people. Most crime is fueled by poverty, not by just, these are just terrible people. But when you have a low view of people, you believe people are worthy of hell, we are not going to care for them in the way that God intended. And as a result, we end up with this very punitive society built on competition and hierarchies. And so I do ultimately believe that this perspective of shifting from a punitive God to a God of love and compassion who is there for everybody is a really fundamental shift in just the way that we perceive the world and the kind of world that we want to live in, and the very purpose of spirituality. Because Jesus, a lot of the book is about the ministry of Jesus. Jesus did not come saying, I am going to die as a sacrifice for your sins so that you can go to heaven when you die. Jesus came and said, this is God's dream for the world. To liberate the oppressed. He came to preach good news for the poor, to tear down these hierarchies where there aren't different kinds of people, rich and poor, but actually that we are all in this together. That was God's dream for the world that Jesus lived and died for. And unfortunately, I don't see Christians fighting for that.
Yeah. Preach. So good. Fun-ish question. Because I don't care much about knowing what happens in the afterlife, or if there is one. I kind of hope there is one, just because I kind of love life, and because I love life and love God and love people, I kind of want there to be something more, but I don't need for there to be. However, in our home, we like to, my partner is not a Christian anymore. I am, and our kids are somewhere in the, I'm not forcing anything on them. And also my partner's not anti-Christian, just, the church and Christianity hurt her so badly. And so I totally understand it. But so in our home, we kind of we have fun with these ideas, and we don't take it too seriously. But we talk a lot about it would be great if I think reincarnation would be awesome. And reincarnation kind of reinforces a universalist. If it's not about heaven or hell or the afterlife, but there is this idea of God is reconciling all things to God's self, right? The bad, the good people and the bad people and everything in between. I'm not a great person, but I'm a better person than a lot of other people. I think I'm a better person than Netanyahu and Trump, and right. I'm further along. I'm better than them. But what if that's because I'm on my 7th go around and they're still on their second, and so they're super terrible, and I've just had more lifetimes to figure it out, right? And so anyway, we talk about reincarnation. We have fun with what the future sort of could look like. What do you think about? Do you spend any time even thinking about that? And if you do, what do you imagine? What do you hope it would be, whether that actually happens or not?
Yeah, in some ways, I'm quite agnostic about it as well. When I think about reincarnation, I think about how even if on the spiritual level, maybe my exact soul doesn't become embodied or enfleshed in a new body with the same soul, on a very material level, which I believe the material is spiritual. It is unquestionably true. I'm going to go in the dirt. My body is going to decompose, and I'm going to push up flowers, and those flowers are going to have parts of me in it. Right now, I have parts of other people in me. I'm breathing in those who have come before, and they're sustaining me right now. Nothing goes anywhere and nothing is wasted, and we're all a part of this in a very material way. And that to me, there's a kind of eternity there. And I do think that as we push this whole thing forward towards love, towards connection, towards flourishing, it all matters. And I don't know how God works all that out. Um, for me, like the thing that challenges my faith is not so much like, oh, did Jesus really rise from the dead, or is God real? Like stuff like that are just like little metaphysical questions that I don't think matter all that much. The things that like get me like feeling kind of doubt or, you know, challenging my faith are like, yeah, is there a future for the human species, or are we going to like irrevocably fuck this whole thing up, you know? Because then it would be like, oh, but like, does it matter then? Because if we go extinct, and so even then though, I have to believe that that life itself matters and life itself is a gift, and that to me has to be enough, leaving agnosticism about like if there's some sort of metaphysical like afterlife. That being said, a lot of my hope rests in the fact that I can't shake the belief that there is a God of love. And if there's a loving God, my hope in the future is not so much about like particular Bible verses that say what's going to happen, as much as in the character of who God is. And so I just trust that all things are going to work together for good, like the Bible says. And I let those questions be God for God, and I try to live my life the way that Jesus showed us to live our lives.
Love that. 50, maybe 60 years from now, if you have a Dick Van Dyke type of body, you're gonna die many years from now. Um, and you know, we're friends. We're not BFFs yet, but you know, for some reason, 50, 60 years from now, you ask me to give your eulogy at your funeral. And so all your friends, your kids, their families, everybody that you've affected, that your work has touched and changed their lives, they're all gathered to, yeah, kind of celebrate your life and talk about all the ways that you changed them. Um, what would you hope that I would get up and say during your eulogy? How do you hope people will remember your life and work?
Sheesh, man. Coming with the heavy questions today.
Small questions, small
Wow.
questions.
I think I believe that life is about love and connection. And if it's not, then it's not really about anything at all. And so I would hope that I helped people feel loved and connected to one another and to something greater than themselves. And if people said that Brian helped me feel loved more than I would have without his relationship, his connection in my life, I think that would be enough for me. Um, I think when I was writing this book, I certainly felt some sense of, boy, I would love to be one small part in making hell less of a foundational pillar in the Christian faith. Um, although I'm a universalist and I don't think it's all about Christianity, Christianity is the largest religion in the world. There's over 3 billion Christians. And if they were less punitive and actually trying to imitate, the world could really use 3 billion people deeply imitating the life of Jesus Christ.
Fuck yeah.
Like I think that would change the world. Unfortunately, the center of Christianity is not deeply imitating the life of Jesus Christ. It is believing the right things about Jesus so that you can go to heaven when you die instead of hell. And that is, I would love to, that's really what my book is about, is trying to pull us out of that, because that paradigm that I just described, it gives you a really unhealthy spirituality that causes you to enter the world as a colonizer, not a lover. And so if I helped people ditch unhealthy spiritualities and follow Jesus in a more authentic way, or not follow Jesus, but actually pursue connection and love in an authentic way, that would mean a lot to me too.
That would be a great legacy, truly. Hell Bent: How the Fear of Hell Holds Christians Back from a Spirituality of Love. Friends, whether you're a Christian or not, whether you feel spiritual or not, highly recommend this book. Brian, this is your first book, right?
First book.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've had some atheists reach out to me that have really loved it, that say, hey, like, I'm an atheist,
No,
but like this vision of Christianity was like really powerful for me, and just knowing that it exists was really meaningful.
Again, there's not enough, especially modern, there's not enough people writing about this like this. And so because we're all touching Christianity all the time, whether we like it or not, it's everywhere in the so-called West. Like, I think it's an important read for everybody. You write so well. I think, friends, if you read it, you'll get to the end and say, I hope Brian is writing something else because that was so good. In the last minute we have together, where do you want people to follow you? What do you have coming up that you want people to get excited about with you? What's going on in Brian Recker's life?
So I post on Instagram a lot. I write on Substack a lot as well. And so you can follow me on my Substack, Beloved with Brian Recker. My Instagram is at @BERecker. One interesting thing that's coming up that some of your folks might be interested in, you probably know Marianne Williamson,
Yep.
and then my friend Brandon Robertson. I don't know if you know Brandon. He's in
Yep.
New York
Yep.
City as well. So they reached out, and we're putting together a prayer rally for America on January 6th. An interfaith. So we've got, in addition to, obviously Marianne is not a Christian. She's kind of a new thought leader. And we've got a Sikh leader, me, Brandon, my friend Carrie Lattiser leads the Post Evangelical Collective. So maybe a few others will be a part of there as well. But on January 6th, we'll be praying just for the state of our country. Honestly, we could really use a revival of the soul in America.
Yeah.
I think so much of what is happening right now, I mean, you don't have to use spiritual language for it, but I don't think it hurts. And I do think that many of our great social movements, like certainly the civil rights movement, were fueled by elevating the consciousness and elevating the spirits of humanity towards a more inclusive and just way of being. And right now, unfortunately, spirituality is being weaponized to create division, toxicity, hierarchy, control, domination, exclusion. And so we are, we're going to be praying for healing and hope going into this next year because we've had a fucking hell of a year, boys.
A fucking hell of a year could literally be the subtitle for this year. Again, I'm no fan of any political administration. I loathe the Democrats, but boy, these last 11 months, not even like, have been just so insane in our own backyard, in Gaza, and everywhere in between. Who's the Sikh leader that is going to be joining this
It's
thing?
a
Is it
Simranjeet Singh.
Simranjeet Singh? Yeah,
Okay.
Simran's been on the podcast as well.
Oh,
Simran is a
very
friend.
cool. So these are all
He's
friends.
Oh my God, he's incredible. He's incredible. He's
I have
incredible. I'm
not met
so
him.
glad.
That's a friend of Brandon's, and Brandon brought him in, and so I'm excited. Though I love an interfaith thing. I mean, spirituality is not owned by Christians, and I love the idea of coming together with my neighbors of faith and praying for our country. And so that'll be like a Zoom that anybody can join. It'll be like a live thing, and so I shared the details on my Instagram, but
Yep.
that'll be on January
Well, yeah.
6th,
We'll
appropriately. So
we'll link all of that in the show notes. The book, your Substack, this event. Yeah, please follow Brian on Instagram. It's really, really great. Actually, let me ask one more question real quickly, right before we close, because your Substack is called Beloved. I know one of the chapters in the book is called The Beloved. Why do you refer to sort of this community as the beloved? I love the beloved. A lot of our black and brown, ancestors, they use that a lot, that phrase, but like, I love beloved so much. It is a spiritual sort of, it has ties to Christianity and whatever, but like, why should we be using that? Because I think it's a good way to like look at
yeah.
community.
So Jesus's message, most scholars would summarize it as the kingdom of God was what Jesus came to announce. But that was very confused. A lot of Christians, when they hear the kingdom of God, they think about heaven when you die. And that's not what it was about at all. The kingdom of God was about God's dream for the world. Jesus was wanting us to reimagine the world, the kind of societies that we build, to build a society that reflected God's priorities for us, our interconnectedness and the love that God would have for us. And so as this worldly thing, and Martin Luther King Jr. talked about that same dream, God's dream for the world, and he called it the beloved community, which I think is more resonant in some ways and more timely than talking about the kingdom of God, which kind of causes people to think about the afterlife and about religion and that sort of thing, as opposed to the very fleshly idea of a community in which everybody experiences their belovedness, which is, I think, what God wants for the world and what I want for the world. And so I talk about that a lot. I have unapologetically just used that. I see King as a spiritual figure in my life that, I've been influenced by in many ways, similarly to how Jesus has influenced me. And so I use that language of the beloved community. But beyond that, my dad is a preacher, and growing up, when my dad would preach, one of my favorite things he would do, and I still think about it, when he would refer to the congregation, he would call them beloved, So like as he'd be preaching, like he would say, and beloved, God just loves you so much, or whatever the case, and that always stuck with me. That's ultimately who we are at the end of the day. I think, what is the message of the gospel? I think if you were just going to narrow it down to just a few words, it would be that you are loved at the core of who you are, that you are loved. And there's nothing you can do about it.
Nothing you can do about it.
That word still speaks a lot to me. And honestly, I use it a lot for my own soul.
Yeah, that's so good. Listeners of this podcast, viewers of this podcast, you are beloved. Thank you for being part of this beloved community through Let's Give a Damn. Beloved Brian Recker, thank you so much for joining me and us on the podcast today. This was just wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate you, buddy.